I'm Besa Luce, and welcome to Other Talking Points, a K2.0 podcast. In this episode, we will be talking about contemporary cinematography in the region. I've been keen to tackle this topic on the show for some time now. I find it particularly important considering the increased interest in what drives and shapes today's filmmakers, what political frameworks have dominated cinematic narratives and how they're being challenged, as well as the constraints and opportunities filmmakers are met with when it comes to financing their work. The region has always been rich in filmmaking, and without doubt, each generation of filmmakers, as well as each country, has had its own political and cultural trajectory that played a role in shaping their relationship to cinema. Yet, there are also commonalities, be it in terms of thematic approach, artistic sensibility and language, or the obstacles in production and distribution. In regard to contemporary filmmaking, what emerges as a potential common thread is this idea of chronicling the nation, and the ways in which this storytelling is conducted are continuously evolving, from examining narratives of war from a perspective of aftermath and trauma, investigating personal and collective archives to shed light on histories that could be forgotten, to tackling identity and gender roles through an increasingly intersectional understanding of historical experiences of oppression. Yet, such themes and entry points into film are not exclusive to the region. These approaches are widespread, while taking into account the cultural and historical nuances that shape different political realities. This is just one of many reasons that film professionals from the region have also critiqued the tendency to box their films into a specific Balkan experience, a label that not only locates the films geographically and culturally, but that also risks being internalized into the gaze applied to the telling of a story. This is one issue I will be looking to unravel today. Other issues to be discussed include the contribution that women filmmakers have been making in expanding the historiography of film, the responsibility filmmakers carry as storytellers in forming our understanding of the world, as well as the difficulties independent filmmakers face in producing and distributing their work. I have two guests on the show to explore and discuss such topics. My first guest is Katrina Krasniqi, an award-winning Kosovo-based film director and researcher working in film and digital humanities since the early 2000s. Her debut feature film, Vera Dreams of the Sea, premiered in the 78th Venice Film Festival in 2021. Among many recognitions, it was also awarded the Tokyo International Film Festival Grand Prix 2021 and Ingmar Bergman Award at Gothenburg Film Festival 2022. She is also a founding member of Kosovo Oral History, a digital archive of personal histories. My second guest is Kumjana Novakova, a research-based filmmaker, film curator, and lecturer. She's the co-founder, chief curator, and director of the Pravo Ljudski Film Festival in Sarajevo. She led the film department of the Museum of Contemporary Arts in Skopje. Her film, Disturbed Earth, has been shortlisted for the Academy Awards and nominated for Best Feature-Length Documentary by the Doc Alliance. Katrina, it's great to have you on the show finally. We've been trying to get you on the show for some time now.
It's very nice being here. Thank you for having me, Besa.
And Kumjana, thank you so much for also joining us from Skopje. This moment is really great to get the opportunity to talk to you today as well.
Thank you for hosting me, even if digitally.
So let's jump right into it. Obviously, we're talking about film and filmmaking in the region. And I would like to begin by exploring the phrase Balkan cinema itself. This is a question for the both of you. So there's been different kinds of critiques that are often expressed when it comes to what is Balkan cinema or what fits within Balkan cinema. Because the Balkans, on one hand, can be understood as a geographical entity, but then there's also assumptions that it's a cultural entity as well due to similar political, economic paths. And then there's this idea that due to these commonalities in history, there's also cultural commonalities. So I would like to ask the two of you, how do you see all of this? Is there such a thing as Balkan cinema? Or does this term actually reduce the nuances as well as the diversity that exists across the larger region when it comes to filmmaking? Katrina, let's begin with you.
I think similar to, Balkan cinema is an imaginary of the West. And in so many levels, it reduces the cinema in itself and also the storytelling, but also it comes with particular expectations of how we're supposed to perform our history, our past, our current life for the West, our sense of humor, our understanding of what happened. In so many ways, it strips you completely of agency when you're called a Balkan filmmaker. Because what is a Balkan filmmaker? I mean, Balkan in itself is pretty much an imaginary political constellation. And it has been shifting, especially in the 20th century, from one country to the other, and then to this constellation of various countries that are supposed to produce a particular imaginary regarding politics of the region. And I don't think that only filmmakers have been affected by this. It has been also musicians and, different kinds of art disciplines. Sometimes I think only contemporary artists engaged in different kinds of mediums have had the possibility to escape that. But then cinema in itself continues to be a very conservative medium in many ways. And if you are coined in a particular idea, such as Balkan cinemas, then it's pretty difficult to kind of release yourself from that idea, especially when you're trying to make your film in co-production with other countries. Because immediately in the first read of your script, there is an expectation. Where is the Balkan vibe in your film? And what is a Balkan vibe in my film? But I think this is gradually changing, especially in this past 15 years. And I think that the main people that have started to change this idea of the Balkan cinema have been the voices that have always been expelled from the medium, such as women and also queer people, because they came with their own stories, and then those stories could not be boxed in the idea of the Balkans. And I think that now it's the beginning of, kind of re-understanding of where you come from and what does it mean to be a part of this geography, but not, these constellation of geographies. Because, I mean, especially in the past 30 years, even the countries in which we have been part of the same country, such as Yugoslavia, have been developing completely differently. And it's very ignorant to kind of fail to understand that. So yeah, I feel we need to kind of thank all of the other contributors in storytelling for kind of getting this freedom, because today I feel less pressure from those types of politics. They are still on the table, and you still do face them, but at least there is a platform to have this type of dialogue. We don't feel lost in translation when we're trying to have that dialogue, and when we're pushing the gaze back. So yeah.
Thanks, Katrine. And Kumjana, how would you go about either critiquing, I guess, this idea of Balkan cinema?
Well, I think that Katrina was pointing out to really a lot of different processes that we have been in a way trapped into. For me, the idea of Balkanization and this compartmentalization of the whole cultural production of the area in different really forms is in a way a colonial discourse. It's directly deriving from the idea that everything which is not white, liberal, and Western is another space, is the other space, and Balkan is definitely one of these really strong contrasting points for the white Europe, which serves as a kind of imaginary other that reflects everything which the white Europe should not be and is not. However, I'm really more and more interested in a way, subverting this idea of the victim, because eventually the other cannot be anything else but a victim of its own incapacity, victim of its own impossibility to be a good one, to be an efficient one, to be powerful one. So this idea of being powerless, to really subvert it and translate it into a survivor at the end, because what we can contribute to as filmmakers, but also in general artists, is to question hierarchies and to really kind of translate historical challenges into knowledges of survival. For me, it's extremely important, this aspect, and therefore I think it's important to go deeper into the idea of what these others can really do and can really say. And I think that we are doing this. I think that if you look at the cultural space in the region, for me, it's so much more powerful, and it's so much more interesting, and it's so much more inspiring, in the sense that in the last few years, there have been really kind of language breaking works coming out from different points in this cultural space, all the different countries. I wouldn't, because okay, it's important to point that for me the differences in the language do not come from the countries; they come from traditions in art making. I have much more similarities with a feminist filmmaker in, I don't know, the other side of the world than with a really entertainment cinema kind of person in Skopje. So I think in this sense, we have been really challenging, and there are really interesting works coming out. And as Katrina was kind of saying it at the end, I feel that we give less and less reason to mainstream cinema to have expectations of what is Balkan cinema. So the response has been really powerful, in the sense that if filmmakers right after the wars in the 90s were responding with the kind of the expectant Balkan narrative, now this is really impossible to kind of put in one container. So
Yeah, so I guess we can say that because the gaze works both ways. It's like there's on one hand this idea that what you're expected, the gaze that is from like the white Europe, Kubiana, as you were saying, from the West, the gaze of what you're expected to produce as a filmmaker from the Balkans. But then it works also the other way, that it becomes internalized by people themselves. So this kind of semi-orientalizing perception and this Balkanizing also, Balkanizing yourself as well. So this, internalizing it, I guess. So what I'm hearing both of you say is that we're seeing this less and less in the new generation of filmmakers, this self-orientalizing and self-Balkanizing, or it's kind of at the beginning that filmmakers are really, they want to challenge that kind of framework. And you were saying, Katrin, earlier that you feel that you're finally at the moment, yes, there's still sometimes certain expectations from you as a filmmaker from here, but the space to negotiate and to produce something different is actually also grown at the same time? Or how would you comment on this?
I think what happened, at least with Kosovo, what happened was that there was, for decades now, there was just a completely different kind of climate in production. So there was never enough budget to make films, but there was always enough space to make what you like. And I think filmmakers have been very much aware and also not comfortable with this type of boxing. So at least from the generation of women filmmakers with which I'm very close, what they always very carefully examine is how they're telling their stories, how they're talking through their characters, where are these characters coming from, and how do these characters actually relate with the place and the context. And of course, we always discuss because there is always this. There is always this idea that, we need to explain where we come from. We need to create a context regarding where we come from because, I come from a small country and nobody knows what happened in this country and whatever. And then that's the first trap. Because once you start explaining where you come from, then you're like, in this process of kind of reinventing all of these traditions within your own, narratives, so you can, create this exotic story about the special place you come from that nobody has seen before. And we just quit that idea completely. We thought, why should I do that? Why should I, I come from a particular part of the world, that is true. It is a small country, but there's Google, if you're interested to understand more regarding the history of where I come from. But the stories that I'm telling regarding the place that I come from also are very universal because experiences, can be very specific. And when you make a film, you want to go with that specific experience. But at the same time, there are certain commonalities which, we cannot be blind to. And then that cultural specificity is not there to create all of these, embroideries of the Balkans, but are there to just kind of understand why certain things are culturally, acceptable, and how do we meet those kinds of also expectations within our own culture. So I think there was a particular point where we just basically quit to do all the explanations. We were like, we just didn't want to take that responsibility of, telling the story of the entire nation, because at some point you need to quit that idea, because we're not here storytellers of the nations. We are storytellers coming from a very, particular perspective, and those particular perspectives need to be developed. And if you want to develop that perspective, you cannot take the burden of telling the story of everyone.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Katrina. And actually, it's a good segue into discussing a bit more maybe about your own personal processes in filmmaking. So, Kumyana, I wanted to ask you, because I think a lot of your work is also very much focused on kind of triggering, if I might say, difficult conversations about gender, power, war, memories. And if you can just talk a bit about how you go about making decisions on how your stories are shaped, particularly in contexts of our societies, and what informs, in a way, your process.
Well, I in general, I think that the process is always something that is going almost. How to say, organically in parallel to our life experiences and our lives, be it in a particular moment or an kind of experience that has been long time ago or awaiting for us in the future. So I come from a space of filmmaking that is really about capturing these processes in cinematic way. So I do not, I'm a research-based filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. So for me, cinema is around me in a way. I have been born in Yugoslavia, and this is a space that doesn't exist anymore. So there is one transformation that has been really shaping a lot of my thinking of who am I and how am I kind of positioned in this world. And also I was a teenager when the wars in the 90s broke out, and I also come from a very particular point in Yugoslavia, which was coined the peaceful space, which is a huge kind of how to say a kind of a fake story, let's say. So these are all aspects that I have been struggling with, and I have been trying to make sense of the whole post kind of 90s narratives, which are still defining our lives, which are so complicated. I cannot box them into one space, but because each of our completely fragmentized societies and countries are living their own realities, but they are always in dialogue with what happened, and what will happen depends really on how we deal with what happened. So I want to provoke the different policies of discrimination, of victimization, of really chauvinism, nationalism, and all of this through the lens of a personal experience. Because for me, cinema, it's always coming from the personal and the honest, and not really from a kind of okay, I will now present the grand narrative, the grand truth, the grand idea. So in all of my work, I try to speak as close as possible to the spaces to which I come from, to which I belong to, and from my own kind of always subjectivity. And this is maybe...
And yes, then I just wanted to connect about your documentary Silence of a Reason, which premiered this year at the Sarajevo Film Festival, because in that one, you're talking about sexual violence during war, specifically in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you also use archive material from the Hague Tribunal. So how was that process of telling that story? I mean, there's more and more, I think, even not just in film, but I think also just in various art forms, even in journalism, more and more documentation of sexual violence as a weapon of war. But what brought you specifically, you personally, to deciding to treat it in your documentary film?
Yeah, well, it's important to notice that I moved to Bosnia only 5 years after the war, and I lived there for almost 20 years. Just recently, I kind of moved out, and this is the space that formed me as an adult, one of the issues that have been always neglected and really never discussed was the gender violence aspect of the conflict. As I was in a way growing up as a filmmaker, I was realizing that this is what is really kind of important for me personally, because at one point I realized that our bodies as women in the region are really kind of archives of violence. This is the space from which we come from, because the war in the 90s is not the only war in which rape was used as a weapon of war strategically and by the military. We come from many wars before that, and this has been always the case. And it was always normalized. It was never treated as a form of violence. It was a consequence and something that it's just normal to happen in wartime. And coming from a family in which expulsion was also happening, I realized that this is something also that me personally, I have it in the family, and that most probably every single woman in the region has it, because statistically it's impossible to break direct connection with the war. And so it has always been a topic that I really wanted to go into and to kind of even, scream and break with, because also another point which is really kind of for me important to face is that in contemporary times this is never discussed and kind of grasped on the level that it should be. It's still a topic that is under the carpet in any kind of field. So finally, when I felt that I am able to, I came across one of the testimonies that came from the ICTY. It's a testimony of witness 87 from the Foča rape camp trials, and for me, it was really something that I could not even imagine after knowing so much on the topic. The gravity of the crimes is really shocking, I would say. So this was the point in which I made a decision to be using the forensic image and the forensic archive, and the work is completely comprised of forensic archive coming from the prosecution and the women witnesses.
Katrina, now I'd like to talk about your film, Vera Dreams of the Sea. And I was rereading an interview, actually, that you did with K2.0 a while back. And there you said something that you felt that when you read the script, because the script is written by Dori Boša, a screenwriter from Kosovo, and when you read the script, you felt that it was about a woman that we never see or think about. So you took on this difficult task of making that woman seen, I would say. So why did this particular story matter to you? And also, what is it like to portray somebody that you think has never been really seen on film? So can you talk about Vera in that sense?
Actually, I think you never stop being nervous about it, because I am not 60 years old. I will be, I hope, one day, but not now. So it was. I remember getting that script from Dori Boša and thinking, since you speak Albanian but Kumjana doesn't, I assume, and that's a pretty wrong assumption. You don't, right? Okay. So Vera in Albanian language, it means summer. So when I got the script, since Dori is of Albanian descent, similar to me, she gave me the script in Albanian language. So what I thought that the title was saying is that summer is dreaming of the sea. I was like, I felt this very deep feeling of longing. And probably that has to do with the fact that we come from a landlocked country. So when we think of the sea, we think of it in very romantic terms. It's always summer by the seaside. And then thinking of the sea, kind of dreaming of summer was pretty. It took me in a completely different story. So I hadn't seen Dori in about 10 years because we were traveling and studying abroad. And if you want to catch up with a friend that is a writer, what you do is you just go and read what they have been writing during that period. So I read the script in about 2 days. And then I realized that Vera was actually a character, and I was like, "This is pretty stupid because my mother's name is Vera too. So why didn't I assume that the character was called Vera?" And Vera is kind of a name of a woman in her 60s. You rarely name a person, a kid today, Vera, right? And then this woman drew me immediately into the story because I was just like pretty shocked. How layered she was, and all the possibilities she was offering me with all the layers, because a woman in her 60s means that she's a woman that was born in the 50s, which is beginning of the 50s, which is immediately after the Second World War. She has been part of a Yugoslavia first, and then she has been part of disintegration of Yugoslavia, and at the same time she has been part of our war, which happened in 98, 99. And then the story was very personal. It was about this woman who, after the suicide of her husband, realizes that the husband has led a double life, and this double life is costing her the family property. And she does have a daughter and has a granddaughter, and she wants to make sure that none of them inherit the poverty that she has inherited from her own mother, right? And then the other thing that I was thinking about was, when was the last time I've seen this woman in a movie, or read a great book where a woman of this generation is a character, or seen a play where a woman of this generation is a character? And yes, I did a lot of digging and did find some amazing stuff that people have written, but still these women were women under the radar. Their life stories, their experiences are experiences under the radar. But, just having a nice script in your hand is not enough most of the time, because still you want to be sure that the story you're telling does connect and relate to those women. So I did while we were developing the script further, and I made the decision that this was going to be my first feature film. I did 10 oral history interviews where I was interviewing specifically women of that generation and recording their life stories, their childhood, their desires, their education, and their life, but also focusing on how they felt regarding property and how they made the decisions regarding the family property. And what hit me really hard was the fact that most of the women that I interviewed felt that if they actually wanted part in the family property, that meant that actually they would part ways with their own families, especially the male members of the family. And this was not different for women in rural areas, or women, it didn't really make any difference for women living in rural or in urban areas, right? And it was shocking in many levels because, women in Kosovo, similar to women in Yugoslavia, they were granted their right to vote in 41 and the right to property in 45. So the legal aspect of property has been regulated quite early on. But then the tradition has never been seriously poked and provoked and pushed around, and has never kind of quit or saw an opportunity in women, And that, as Kumjana said, if you want to go into this kind of a complex story, there needs to be a personal trigger, because the personal trigger comes with the drive to investigate the story further and create an understanding not only from that personal sense, but also create a wider understanding regarding how people make these kinds of decisions. And of course, the personal story came with my mother, Vera, who in the mid-80s decided to divorce my father, and it was pretty unusual for a woman of my mom's generation to make that kind of decision. But my mother fought my father in court for 4 years for our share of the property, and nothing happened. Not because my mother was not eligible to the property, but because the system was very determined to exhaust her emotionally and also financially in this journey. So there was also the political situation, because the 80s, she was approaching the end of 80s, the political situation was becoming pretty tense, so she had to make a pretty sober decision, like, am I going to invest all of this money in this lawyer and in this court system that basically does not see me, or is this money going to go for my daughters? And then she decided to support my sister and I, even though she was not aware that the upcoming decade, especially for a Kosovo Albanian woman living in Kosovo, is going to be a pretty dark one. However, all of these experiences, came from this personal place, but then the personal place, it's a great, potential and drive, but it's not enough. You need to do your homework. you need to go out there and meet the community and meet those women and kind of understand where you're going with that story, because your own experience sometimes can be pretty niche experience. And that's not enough to tell a good story, you know?
Yeah. You're both talking about the importance that either personal stories or personal triggers play in your approach also to storytelling. And do you think that we're seeing also more and more of these kind of stories because there's more women also now? I think producing film and making film, because we have been witnessing the emergence of a new generation of women filmmakers and producers. So what are you seeing? Is this expanding the scope of cinematic production in also point of view in the stories being told? Because I do think that the personal for women has a different kind of political weight and political connotation because of the various forms of societal, political, whether, you know, like discrimination or oppression. And so I think that maybe this is why we're seeing more stories, is because there's a different kind of attentiveness that maybe, or even, I don't want to use the word sensitivity because of the way it's associated in a problematic way with gender, but sensitivity is also good. Sensibility, maybe.
Yeah, sensibility, I think it works. Listen, till about 70 years ago, what we read and watched exclusively were experiences of white men, Western white men. And it's not, and it took us quite a while as women, but also as queer people. I'm not queer, but I associate very deeply with the queer community and felt always very close to their cause because it was very similar to mine. It took us quite a while to claim the space. Mostly because we were always poorer, less educated, and living in the margins. And the main stories of our societies did happen in the margins. And were pretty exact tellers of how and why certain political situations were developing, not only in our poor, disappeared Yugoslav constellation, but worldwide. So what we're seeing in the past 3 decades, I think, and it started mostly with literature, is, first of all, more Black women writing. They have always written, but they were not published, you know. So I think, and then also not only Black women, but, you know, queer people and people of color. And then, as I said in the beginning, cinema is, it doesn't matter if you're making mainstream films or making art house films. The industry in itself is a very conservative industry, and it takes quite a lot of time to break all the ideas regarding the stories and where those stories are coming from. And for cinema, it took quite a while. For example, if you watch a very mainstream film in the beginning of the 2000s, you basically can't relate to it anymore, politically, socially, especially from the gender perspective in that case, because it's extremely conservative and you can't believe how much things have moved in the past 20 years. And I think it started with the academia in the mid of the 20th century, and then it gradually moved in literature, with mostly women and then queer people. And now it's coming gradually in the cinema. And this cinema, why are people watching this? We were convinced, historically convinced, that there is no audience for these movies, you know. And what we're facing in the past 2 decades is that there is audience for these movies, and people want to see these movies because these movies are about those people that were never considered an audience, and they have always been a majority. So I think that is also opening an opportunity for people to kind of tell braver stories. And especially in this past 10 years, I've seen some of the best cinematic works, brave films from all around the world, very brave perspectives, very sharp storytelling, very political, and not being afraid being political in your films. Because, being political in cinema till I guess the end of 90s was, the consequence not only here, but worldwide would be being blacklisted. And as a woman, you would get only one opportunity, or as a queer person or a person of color. And now that is changing, and it's not happening only here, it's happening worldwide, and it's very refreshing, because it has become a part of mainstream. And if somebody told me when I started studying film that the films I wanted to make would become part of mainstream, I would never believe them, because I knew how stiff everything was, especially in the cinema world.
And Kumyana, how do you see the contribution of women filmmakers, the contribution that they have been making in expanding this historiography of film?
Well, I cannot agree more with Katrina, with what she was saying. For me, what is on top of this, maybe one more really important aspect, is that women have been part of cinema since its inception. But what is kind of really important is that the canon of cinema is written by men. And it's a chauvinist space, highly hierarchical. Of course, it's directly connected also with the machinery that cinema works upon, because it's economically also one of the most important art forms. It's in certain countries, it's a double-digit part of the economy turnover. So this kind of conditions the fact that where there is money, there is no woman in general. And of course, women presence has been always conditioned as someone who is serving for the reproduction of capital, or the reproduction of the male gaze, or and so on and so forth. So and what for me is really not only refreshing, but also extremely important for me personally, is to see so many feminist filmmakers and researchers, film researchers, who are fighting for the rediscovery of the presence of women throughout cinema history. So finally, we see stories of small cinemas, which are for me so much more important at this point as my historical kind of reference than the mainstream cinematic history. We have been finding really amazing films that have been they never were on the screen, they never were distributed, they never were shown, and their audiences have been neglected of this. And it's the same audiences that Katrina is talking about that today are still out there, and we are finally getting in touch with. And this is the cinema that we belong to, even in the space of Yugoslavia, it has been cinema was very important part of the creation of the idea of Yugoslavia. But then on the other side,
but also very male-dominated industry. I mean,
absolutely,
even though it was propagating for a larger social and political space for women, right?
Absolutely. And in this kind of mainstream cinema of Yugoslavia, there was never space for the female as a political subject. However, if you look at the experimental scene of Yugoslavia, which was extremely alive, there are so many important filmmakers that were completely erased from the official canon, and that we find them only now. For example, just few weeks ago, we screened The Diaries of Vukica Gilas. Is an author who has been filming for 30 years. And her film, 30 years, imagine. And 30 years, she was part of the really experimental cultural space in Belgrade. She was never shown. She died and she never saw her work screened. And only 10, 15 years after her death, she edited the work. And thanks to Xian, okay, we are able to see it. But for me, her work had to be edited and packed again by a man in order to be shown. It's another layer of, we are breaking free, but still, so we have our historically, there are feminist and female filmmakers that we have been neglected to connect with. And what is for me interesting is to be redefining my connections with these forces behind, with these historical figures, not in a revisionist way, but in a way that informs another history of mine, that it informs another present, therefore, and another future. Because I think that at the end, providing the possibility for another gaze is about kind of subverting this simplified gaze, which is always about power relations, which is always about, in a way, subordination of not only women, but any kind of different category which goes outside of the male liberal political subject. And this is not only women or queer or LGBT groups, but it's also the workers, it's also anyone who is not in a power position.
And just for kind of a last question, I wanted to talk about just your experiences also in financing your work, because on one hand there's little financial state support. I would say, we could say across the region, there's unstable markets, if we may. There's not that strong also distribution networks. So also film festivals have somehow been playing this role in a lot of ways, because they also have project markets. But then it's also very difficult to access some of these festivals. You've both made it quite high up A category film festivals, but that's not necessarily an experience for all filmmakers. So just what are some, like, just briefly for the end, just where are the possibilities for filmmakers to find financial support for their work, and also, is there also in the digital transitions, like streaming platforms? There's been different projects from the region that have managed to tap into whether Netflix or Amazon, etc. So how you're seeing all of this impacting also in general filmmaking, whether on a personal level for you or also like a general experience. Katerina?
In Kosovo, it's pretty kind of straightforward. There is a film center. The film center has an annual yearly call, and that annual yearly call is quite competitive. People that are interested to make feature films, documentaries, animation, and all different kinds of formats can apply there. And then if you pass that first step, which is very important, especially if you're interested to do like a European co-production, then there are possibilities in the region. There are several agreements that the Film Center has reached with Macedonia, for example, Albania, now Montenegro, and they are trying to develop the similar agreement with Croatia and Slovenia for regional funding, which is called minority co-production funding. Then that's like a second step. But still, even with those funds, you cannot really reach to a point where you can produce a feature film with the funding you get. So then then you enter all of these other competitions, which are in European level. Kosovo, for example, in that sense, has a much more difficult path, mostly because Kosovo is not recognized by many European cultural organizations. First of all, not being part of the European Union. Secondly, because there are 5 countries still in European Union that don't recognize the independence of Kosovo, so that also blocks the membership of Kosovo in all of these organizations. And then we have to find back ways, which are most of the time competitions where we are eligible to compete for particular funds, but not, or we go through our partners in the region who are eligible to compete, or maybe there is a possibility because the people know what's happening politically with our country, and they try to kind of create these other platforms where we can compete and get some more funds in order to finish our films. But this is just like the the financial scheme. It that has always been an issue, but most of the time, I mean, the most crucial issue has always been the stories you want to tell, because it took a while for all of our industries to divorce from that male-dominated cinema and gaze. When I decided to make Vera Dreams of the Sea, I was very often told, this is a brilliant story, but who will want to watch this film? Who are the people who is your target audience? And people are kind of, the industry in itself try to kind of, from initiation, it's not the reality anymore, so I don't want to talk in those terms, but it tried to discourage people to, first of all, enter this journey of telling these stories that were, if you like, these under the radar stories. And then this is the journey, it's a journey of resilience and perseverance, really, where you're like, okay, I'm very stubborn, and this is a story I'm going to tell, and then I'm going to, try out all the possible, the venues and tell people and try to meet the right people who understand the story I want to make. For Vera, it took me 7 years to make the movie. It was a very, very long journey, but I was lucky because I was really surrounded by a good support team. And it's important to have that support, There are two elements there. The first one is if you're making a feature film, be that a documentary or a fiction, it has to be something that it will keep you curious, for 10 years, because it will take you a long time to make. And secondly, you need to surround yourself with a good support system of professionals who are interested in that kind of storytelling and will be there for you in all of those moments of, despair, but also development. And I think women and queer people and people of color kind of took the entire industry by surprise. So now there is, I think, there will always be struggle to make films, especially for us. But at least now the doors are not always closed. There is more opening in the industry itself, and it's pushed by the audiences, because in the end, yes, I made Vera, and Vera did had a great festival life, but it also had a good life in cinemas. And I got an opportunity to meet all the possible women of Vera's generation worldwide. And that was a great treat for me, but also the young people, because there is such a great appreciation from the young, not only here in the region, but worldwide, for our stories. So, yeah.
And Kumiana, what has been your experience in this regard?
Well, I think that one of the problems with making possible our work is that cinema is an art form which is regarded as an economy. It's regarded as a market, and it's governed by market rules. And this means really if you do not fall into the market expectations in terms of language, in terms of storytelling, in terms of even production modes, and especially production modes, then it will take you 5, 7, 10 years to really make a work. And for me, it's been really important to understand which are the projects that I have to kind of develop through this long line, and which are the projects that I can maybe take a sideway, let's say, and finance in different ways. And maybe this is maturity, to arrive to a point to understand, okay, some projects need to happen now, right now, and I don't have the possibility to be waiting, because with some projects you have to take the long way, and you have to There is no other way. So for me, the knowledge is there. For example, Silence of Reason was financed as an art project. I received an art grant also because I could not bear physically to live in this world of trauma. I mean, I live in the world, we all live in a world of trauma in this way or another way, but I could not go the long way working on and with rape testimonies for years and years. I had to do it now, and also because it was a kind of a, scream in a way. On the other hand, my previous work, Disturbed Earth, we worked on, like Katrina, 7 years. I was 7 years every day with this project. And it's not because the project needed 7 years. It was because I could not close it earlier. So I would say that on one side, of course, we have to organize and push for diversification of the funding in cinema, because there are models in which there are more artistic-oriented cinema funds, which are responding to more kind of different ways of filmmaking. So we have to push for this also to happen. I don't know how, because our governments are not realizing even much simpler things in cinema funding, let alone the differences in languages, in cinematic languages. But on the other hand, I think also we need to be pragmatic and to be kind of creating structures of solidarity that are able to support us when we have this kind of projects that need maybe a different way. And I think we have been pretty good in this. And this goes back to what I was saying about our knowledges as survivors. We in the region have survived many, many, many more serious issues than not being able to fund our films. And we can activate these structures of solidarity at any point of life, I have the feeling. So working together and going alternatively, it's also an option, but not rejecting or giving up on the insistence to have our structures built and reformed and put in place simply.
Thank you so much to both of you, Kumiana and Katrina, for being on Other Talking Points and for this truly lovely conversation. It was great talking to both of you.
Thank you, Besa. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Kumiana. I hope I meet you live.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's been really an inspiring talk.
Other Talking Points is a K2.0 podcast. You can listen to it regularly on our website, kosovo2.0.com, or by subscribing to K2.0 on Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube.